He said it on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten back from my water aerobics class at the YMCA, the one I've gone to every Tuesday morning for 11 years. My hair was still damp. I had a towel around my shoulders and a cup of chamomile tea in my hand, and I was settling into my recliner, the green one by the window, the one that faces the backyard where my husband planted the azaleas before he passed, and I turned on the television to catch the tail end of the morning news. That's when my son-in-law walked in, looked at the screen, looked at me and said, "I need you to go upstairs. I have a call." Not a question, not a request, a dismissal. I looked at him. He was already pulling out his phone, already moving toward the couch like the room was his, and I was the one who had wandered in by accident. I said, "This is my living room, Patrick." He didn't even look up. "It'll just be 30 minutes. I need quiet." I sat there for a moment. The tea was warm in my hands. The azaleas were blooming outside, the same pale pink they've been every April since Gerald planted them in 2003. I thought about saying something else. I thought about a lot of things. Then I stood up, walked upstairs, and sat on the edge of my bed. And I made a decision. My name is Irene. I am 67 years old. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in the same house I have lived in for 31 years. I raised my daughter, Melissa, in this house. I taught her to ride a bike in the driveway. I helped her with her homework at the kitchen table. I watched her graduate from high school and then from the University of Georgia, and I cried both times, the happy kind of crying that makes your chest feel full instead of empty. When Melissa met Patrick 8 years ago, I tried to love him the way you love the people your children choose. He was charming at first, in the way some men are charming when they want something from you. He called me Miss Irene and brought wine to Sunday dinners and made Melissa laugh in a way I hadn't seen before. They got married in the fall. It was a beautiful wedding. I paid for half of it. The trouble didn't start right away. It crept in slowly, the way water gets into an old house. A little at a time, in places you don't think to check until the damage is already done. 3 years ago, Patrick lost his job. He had been working in commercial real estate, and when the market shifted, his position was eliminated. He told Melissa it was temporary. He said he had leads, that something was going to come through any day. Melissa called me and she was scared, and I told her what any mother would tell her daughter. "Come home," I said, "both of you. Stay as long as you need." I meant it when I said it. I want to be clear about that. I opened my home because I love my daughter, not because I expected anything in return. Melissa had always been a good girl, thoughtful, the kind of person who remembers birthdays and calls to check in. I assumed Patrick would find work quickly. I assumed they would be back in their own place within a few months. That was 3 years ago. Patrick never found another job. Or rather, he found reasons not to keep the ones he started. One position had a commute he didn't like. Another had a manager he didn't respect. A third paid less than he thought he deserved. Meanwhile, Melissa was working full-time as an office manager at a medical practice in town, leaving every morning at 7:30 and coming home tired every evening at 6. I watched her do this every single day. I watched her carry everything, while Patrick stayed home and called it consulting and exploring opportunities. I paid the mortgage. I paid the utilities. I bought the groceries. I didn't ask them for anything because I told myself it was temporary. I kept telling myself that. What I didn't tell myself, what I should have paid more attention to, was the slow way Patrick began to treat the house as though it belonged to him. It started small. He moved the furniture in the living room without asking me. He changed the passcode on the Wi-Fi router and had to be reminded to share it. He started cooking dinner sometimes, which sounds kind, except that he would use every pot I owned and leave the kitchen a wreck and act like he had done me a favor. He started having calls, long ones, on his laptop, in the living room, with the door half closed and a look on his face that told me not to interrupt. When I would come downstairs for something, he would look at me the way you look at a dog that has wandered into a room where it doesn't belong. I am not a dog. This is not his room. But I said nothing. I kept my peace. I told myself that patience was a virtue, that this was my daughter's husband, that the situation was hard for him too. Men can be proud in complicated ways. And I had known enough proud men in my life to understand that Patrick's behavior came from a place of wounded ego, not cruelty. I was wrong about that last part. The Tuesday in April was not the first incident. It was just the one that crossed a line I hadn't known I'd drawn until it was already behind me. After he told me to go upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed and I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about Melissa working double shifts during tax season while Patrick decided to take up woodworking in my garage. I thought about the Thanksgiving when he invited his brother and his brother's girlfriend without asking me and then expected me to cook for 6 people with 4 days' notice. I thought about Christmas morning when I came downstairs and he was already in my chair with his feet up and the remote in his hand, and I made coffee in my own kitchen and stood at the counter to drink it because I didn't want to ask him to move. I thought about all of it, sitting on the edge of my bed with my damp hair and my chamomile tea, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Anger is hot. This was colder than that. This was clarity. I finished my tea. I got dressed. I drove to the public library on Bull Street because I needed to think somewhere that wasn't my house, and I needed the internet, and I didn't trust myself to concentrate with Patrick's voice carrying up through the floorboards. I sat at a table in the corner, and I looked up tenant rights in Georgia. This is the part that most people don't know, and it's the part that changed everything. When someone lives in your home for more than 30 days without a written lease, they become what is called an occupant or a licensee under Georgia law. They don't have the same rights as a tenant with a signed contract, but they do have some rights, and you cannot simply change the locks and put their belongings on the lawn. You have to go through a process. It's called an unlawful detainer action. You file paperwork. You give notice. You go through the court if necessary. I did not know any of this when I invited them to stay. What I learned that afternoon at the library was that I had every legal right to reclaim my home, but I had to do it correctly. I couldn't act out of anger. I couldn't make mistakes that would slow things down or give Patrick anything to use against me. So I didn't. I drove home that evening and I made dinner, and I sat at the table and I listened to Melissa talk about her day, and I watched Patrick scroll through his phone, and I smiled and I said very little. Inside, I was already moving. The next morning, I called my attorney. I have had the same attorney since Gerald and I bought this house in 1994. His name is Mr. Caldwell, and he has the kind of face that looks like it has seen everything twice and is not easily surprised. I told him what had been happening. I told him about the 3 years, about the money, about Patrick's behavior, about what he had said to me on Tuesday. Mr. Caldwell listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Irene," he said, "you are the owner of that property. Your name is the only name on the deed. What we need to do is give them proper written notice to vacate, and we do it in a way that is documented and legally sound." "How long does that take?" I asked. 60 days is standard in Georgia for a situation like this, but we need to serve the notice correctly. 60 days felt like a long time. I thought about 60 more dinners at that table. I thought about 60 more mornings making coffee in my own kitchen and not sitting in my own living room. "Do what needs to be done," I said. Mr. Caldwell prepared the notice. He called it a notice to vacate, and it was formal and precise and completely unemotional, which was exactly the tone I wanted. It listed the property address. It listed the date by which they were required to leave. It outlined what would happen if they did not comply. He sent a process server to the house on a Thursday afternoon. I was not there. Mr. Caldwell had suggested I not be home when it was served, and I agreed with him. I had driven over to my friend Gloria's house, and we were sitting on her porch drinking sweet tea when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that said, simply, served. I set my phone face down on the armrest and took a long sip of my tea. Gloria looked at me. She knew what was happening. She had been the one to talk me through those 3 years, the one who listened when I called her frustrated, the one who told me more than once that I was being too patient for my own good. Done? She asked. Done, I said. Melissa called me 40 minutes later. I had been expecting the call. I answered on the second ring. Mum. Her voice was tight. What is this? There was a man here. He handed Patrick some kind of legal document. I know, I said. What do you mean you know? Mum, what's going on? I told her. I kept my voice calm and even, the way you do when you have thought about something for a long time and made your peace with it. I told her that I loved her and that I was glad she and Patrick had had a place to stay when they needed it, and that I hoped those 3 years had given them time to get back on their feet. I told her that I needed my home back. I told her that I needed my home back. I told her that 60 days was plenty of time to find a place to land. There was a long silence. Patrick is furious, she said finally. I imagine he is, I said. He's saying this is humiliating, that you went behind our backs, that you could have just talked to us. I thought about Tuesday morning. I thought about the green recliner and the morning news and the word go. I did talk, I said, for 3 years, in every way except the one that mattered. This is me talking in the way that matters. Another silence, and then Melissa said something I had not expected. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry it got to this point. That was the moment I almost cried. Not out of sadness exactly, but out of something closer to relief. The particular relief of being seen by the person whose seeing matters most to you. I had been afraid that Melissa would only hear Patrick's version, that I would lose my daughter along with my patients, but she was still there, on the other end of the line, and she was sorry. I know, baby, I said. I know. The next 60 days were not easy, but they were manageable, which is a different thing. Patrick did not speak to me. He moved through the house like I was furniture, which, honestly, was a relief after the previous 3 years of his opinions and his phone calls and his presence spreading into every corner. He spent a lot of time in the garage with his woodworking equipment. He had a look on his face like he was waiting for something to go wrong with my plan, like he expected me to feel guilty and take it all back. I did not take it back. Melissa and I had quiet conversations in the kitchen in the evenings after Patrick had gone upstairs. She told me that she had known for a while that things couldn't go on the way they were. She told me that she had tried to bring up getting their own place with Patrick multiple times, and that he always had a reason why it wasn't the right time. She told me that she had felt, for the last year or so, like she was stuck, like she couldn't move the situation forward herself. I needed someone to move it for me, she said. I'm ashamed of that, but it's the truth. I told her that there was no shame in it, that sometimes we get caught in the current of someone else's life, and we need an outside force to help us find our footing again. That I had not served that notice at her, I had served it at the situation. She found them an apartment on the east side of town. 2 bedrooms, nice complex, not far from her office. She signed the lease herself, with her own name on it, and she did not put Patrick's name on the account. I noticed that. I didn't say anything about it. But I noticed they left on a Saturday in June. I did not make a production of it. I did not stand on the porch watching. I drove to the farmer's market in the morning, the way I always do on Saturdays, bought tomatoes and peaches and a jar of local honey, and came home in the early afternoon to a house that was quiet, in a different way than it had been quiet before. Before, the quiet had been cautious. It was the quiet of a house that was holding its breath, of a woman walking softly in her own home, of trying not to take up too much space in a place that had her name on the deed. This quiet was different. This quiet was mine. I set my grocery bags on the kitchen counter. I walked into the living room. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the green recliner by the window, and then I walked over and sat down in it. I felt the familiar, worn fabric under my hands. I looked out at the azaleas. They had gone past their peak now, the blooms a little faded, the way they get by late June. But they were still there, still pink, still exactly where Gerald had planted them. I turned on the television. I watched the afternoon news with the volume exactly where I like it. I want to say something to the women, and the men, who are in the middle of what I was in the middle of. Because I know you're out there. I know because I spent 3 years being one of you, telling myself that keeping the peace was the same as having peace, telling myself that patience was a virtue, and that things would sort themselves out if I just waited long enough. They don't sort themselves out. I want to tell you that plainly. The situations that feel like they might improve on their own almost never do, because the person who benefits from the situation has no reason to change it. You are waiting for them to have a conscience. They are waiting for you to give up. What I should have done, what I wish I had done, was set clear expectations from the very beginning. A written agreement, a timeline, a conversation about finances, about contributions, about what temporary actually meant in terms of months, not feelings. I was afraid that asking for those things would seem cold, would seem unloving, would make Melissa feel like I was putting conditions on my support. I put conditions on nothing. And for 3 years I paid for that generosity in ways I didn't fully recognize until I was sitting on the edge of my bed with damp hair, being told to leave my own living room. You are allowed to love people and still have a contract. You are allowed to be generous and still have boundaries. You are allowed to help someone without disappearing yourself in the process. And if you find yourself, like I did, already past the point where a conversation would have helped, if you find yourself 3 years in and out of options, then know that you still have choices. You have legal rights. You have the right to reclaim your own space. It is not cruel to do so. It is not disloyal. It is, in fact, an act of love for yourself, and perhaps even for the person you're asking to leave, because sometimes people need a push to stand on their own 2 feet. Melissa and I have dinner together every other Sunday now. We sit at the kitchen table, the same one where I helped her with her homework, and we eat and we talk, and sometimes we don't say very much, and that's all right too. The silence between us has changed. It's the comfortable kind now. Patrick found a job 3 months after they moved out. Not the most prestigious one he'd been holding out for, but a steady one, a real one, and from what Melissa tells me, he is doing better. I don't know the details, and I don't ask. What happens in their apartment is their business. What happens in my house is mine. Last Tuesday I came home from my water aerobics class, and my hair was still damp, and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and I walked into the living room and I sat down in my green recliner and I turned on the morning news. Nobody told me to move. I didn't go anywhere. I sat there until the tea was gone and the news was over, and the sun had shifted through the window and the azaleas were glowing in the morning light, and I thought about how strange it is that peace, real peace, can feel so quiet. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just quiet and warm and entirely your own. That's what I wanted you to know, that it's possible to get it back. I have thought a lot about what made Patrick the way he was. Not to excuse it, I am past needing to excuse it, but because I think understanding it matters more than being angry about it. He was a man who had stopped building anything of his own, and so he started treating what belonged to someone else as though it were his by right. That's what happens when a person goes long enough without accountability. The edges of what's theirs and what isn't start to blur, and then they stop seeing the line at all. Patrick didn't wake up one morning and decide to disrespect me. He drifted there, slowly, because nobody stopped him. Because I didn't stop him. I kept the peace so consistently that he forgot there was anything to keep peace about. That's the part I had to sit with. The hard part. Not what he did, but what I allowed, day after day, for 3 years, because I told myself that kindness meant silence. It doesn't. Kindness is a generous thing, but it has to have a spine in it. or it just becomes a habit of disappearing. What I did, driving to that library, sitting at that corner table, looking up Georgia tenant law on a public computer, that was an act of intelligence, not brilliance, nothing complicated, just the willingness to stop feeling and start thinking. To ask, what are my actual options here? What does the law say? What can I do that is calm and documented and impossible to argue with? That kind of thinking doesn't come naturally when you're hurt. You have to choose it. You have to decide that being effective matters more than being right out loud. And then there's the question of Melissa, which is the part I turn over most in my mind. She is my daughter. She is the person I would do almost anything for. But somewhere in those 3 years, I had confused loving her with protecting her from discomfort. Every time I didn't speak up, I told myself I was sparing her. What I was actually doing was leaving her stuck. She told me herself. She needed someone to move the situation because she couldn't move it herself. A mother's job is not to remove every hard thing from her child's path. It is to raise someone strong enough to walk the path. It is to raise someone strong enough to walk the path. I had forgotten that for a while. The notice to vacate reminded us both. What I want people to take from what I've been through is this. The longer you wait to hold a line, the harder it becomes to find where the line was. Not because the line moves, but because you start to doubt whether you're allowed to have one. You are. You are always allowed to have one. Being generous with your home, your time, your money, none of that means you surrender your right to be treated with dignity inside your own 4 walls. Those 2 things can exist at the same time. In fact, they have to, or one of them will eventually destroy the other. I got my house back. I got my recliner, my morning news, my quiet. I got my daughter back too, which mattered more than any of it. And Patrick got something he needed even if he didn't want it. He got the push that finally made him stand on his own. I don't take credit for that, but I don't apologize for it either. You can love someone completely and still refuse to disappear for them. That's not a contradiction, that's just the truth, and it took me 67 years and one Tuesday morning to learn it well enough to live it.